Hey guys, once again, as you can see, I got the Captain Dork headset on, so that means it's time for another tool demo. Today, I'm going to show you guys what we're going to be doing with the pedestal grinder, also known as table grinder, also known as a stationary grinder. And the reason why it's called stationary is because, well, it does not move unless it's like not securely clamped down, which this one is not. In the future, ours will be clamped down, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, as far as this grinder goes, we have a few steps we have to worry about. Before I jump into that, though, I do want to address the grinder. So on this grinder in particular, you can see that we actually have two different grinding stones. You can see here that we have our spark guards, we have our coarse grinding stone, and we have our fine grinding stone. There's two of them. The coarse one is, well, it's coarse, and the fine one is, well, it's fine. And on these two stones, they're meant for different work. The coarse stones obviously are meant for removing large amounts of material in a quicker fashion. The fine one is meant for smoothing and polishing, not polishing, but just smoothing and making sure for, well, more fine work. Regarding the grinder, in terms of setting it up, there's a few things we have to be looking at. The first thing we have to set up in terms of this grinder is what we call our tool rests. The tool rests are these two little guys right here and right here. The reason they're called tool rests is because, well, when you're grinding on your tool, you are literally going to be resting the tool right on this little platform right there. And you want to make sure that when you're doing this, your tool rest is set between 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch away from the grinding wheel. So if you look at our tool rest right here, you can see we have about a 1/8 inch gap all the way around this one, and about the same over here, about a 1/8 inch gap all the way around. Okay, and I want to show you that because that is actually required for setting this thing up correctly. If you ever have anything larger than a 1/8 inch gap, then you need to readjust your tool stops so that way nothing will get sucked down in. Now what happens during an extended amount of time, these grinding stones will actually get consumed during the grinding process. You have to pay attention to that because as they get consumed, they will get smaller. And as they get smaller, the gap between the tool rest and the grinding stone is going to increase. And eventually, the gap between the tool rest and the grinding stone will increase so much that will actually be beyond 1/8 of an inch. And the reason why you want to have it smaller than 1/8 of an inch is because if it's bigger than 1/8 of an inch, material will get sucked down inside between the tool rest and the grinding stone. It's going to bounce around all inside the shielding effect there, and eventually it's going to spit back out at you, or it's going to spit out the backside and bounce off the back wall and hit you right in the face. And I say that because I've actually seen that happen to students before, where it actually got sucked down inside the housing, spun around, kicked out the backside, and then came back at the student in the face. So you have to make sure that when you're actually setting these things up, you do pay attention to the tool rest and make sure that it's set correctly from the correct distance in front of the grinding wheel so nothing gets sucked down inside. When you're grinding on this, you never want to continually grind in one spot. You want to slowly move back and forth as you grind. And the reason is if you continually grind in one spot, you will wear a groove in the center of this grinding stone. If a groove develops in the grinding stone, that actually weakens the grinding stone and it makes it so that it becomes unbalanced. If it becomes unbalanced, then what can happen is this thing's spinning really, really, really fast. Okay, these things spin at usually about 3,600 RPM. Since it spins so fast, we have to make sure that this grinding stone stays pretty much perfectly balanced. If there's a chance that this thing becomes unbalanced while it's spinning, the grinding stone will actually break apart, and it can actually break apart and shoot back at you, which brings me to my next point. Whenever you're grinding on this thing, never stand directly behind the grinding disc. Always stand to either one side of the grinding stone or the other. And the reason being is one, if the grinding stone ever does come flying apart, it will fly apart in a circular direction. It's going to fly apart this way or out the back of the grinder. Okay. Now, it also happens that even if you have your tool rest set correctly, your grinding stone can still catch material. And if that happens, then you have to make sure that you're not standing in front of it because if some material gets caught in this grinding stone and it bounces around to the housing here and eventually kicks straight back out, it's going to kick straight at you if you're standing directly behind it. So you want to make sure when you're grinding, you're standing off to one side. So when something does kick out at you, it's hopefully going to kick out and go right by you or out the back side. Because the last thing you want to have happen is that 36 RPM, 3600 RPM wheel. If it breaks apart, you don't want those pieces of chunks of grinding wheel shooting back at you. You want to make sure they're shooting in the plane where the wheel is spinning. Okay, so don't stand either directly in front, always stand directly to the side or the side. On the notes to the side, you never want to grind on the side of the grinding wheel. The reason why, if you have a grind on the side of the grinding wheel, this once again weakens the grinding wheel. If it weakens the grinding wheel, that can cause the grinding wheel to come apart, come into pieces, and then it'll actually allow these things to shoot back at you or back at another person or anything else that's in the way. So you have to make sure that you're only grinding on the face of the grinding wheel. Don't grind on the sides, on either side, only grind on the face. And that holds true for both of them. Only grind on the face of the grinding wheel. When you're going back and forth, don't push too hard. You have to make sure you're listening to the motor of the grinder. If the motor bogs down too much, then you're grinding too hard. Just ease off on the pressure, and also make sure that it should be a steady stream of sparks coming off this thing as you're grinding. It shouldn't be like, hit and miss sparks. It should be a steady stream coming off whichever thing you're grinding on. Also, if you press too hard, once again, this can cause damage to the grinding wheel. And if that happens, then you have to make sure that you're keeping an even motion, you're going back and forth, you're rotating around on your workpiece, basically in a way to where it's not going to cause damage to the grinding wheel because you don't want these things to fly apart on you. All right. Let's see. I think there was. Make sure there's no one behind the grinding wheel. Make sure they're not getting covered in sparks. Make sure that you do have your protective shield down. This will help protect your face from getting, obviously, any sparks in it. Obviously, situation, you do want to make sure you have glasses on because if you don't have glasses on, well, you don't want to use this thing in the first place. Also, grinders, you want to wear gloves. And the reason why you want to wear gloves is because if your hand were to come in contact with a grinder by accident, it is just one layer of extra protection between the grinding wheels that's spinning at 3,600 RPM and your hands. And they also offer heat protection because you're going to notice as you're grinding, your metal is going to get hot. And the hotter it gets, the more uncomfortable it's going to be to hold on to these things. So you want to make sure that you're holding on to the metal securely, and having the gloves does help protect your hands from not only heat, but also sparks that are coming off. And if you were to have a mishap and your hand just grazed the grinding wheel, then it's only going to graze through your glove and it's not going to go through your skin. So the grinder is definitely one of those situations where you do want to be wearing gloves, but not every machine you will want to wear gloves. But the grinder is one of those situations where you do want to wear them. Okay? Don't leave the machine until it's come to a full stop. The reason being is you don't want someone to be walking by and come in contact with this thing. If you do come in contact with it, someone does come in contact with it or comes close to it, you do want to be there to help to make sure that they're not going to, graze or have anything bad happen. Okay? So as for operation, it's pretty simple. Turn the grinder on, wait for it to come to speed. You'll know when it comes to speed because it steadies out, okay? And then you can start grinding on it. Always make sure that your tool or your grinding piece you're grinding on is resting against the tool rest. Don't try to grind freehand up in the air. Always make sure that the tool is actually resting against the tool rest. Don't try to hold it up in the air. If you try to hold the tool up in the air, the chance that it may get caught in the grinding wheel and it'll kick on you, and it'll get the piece of the tool or the material caught in the grinder somehow. So always make sure that you're resting the tool against the tool rest. You can see here, we can go around. We can see here that the coarse grinding wheel does just that. Okay, it leaves grooves in our material and it makes it so that it's removing a lot of material quickly, but it doesn't make for very fine quality. Okay, so if I want to come over to the fine wheel, I can then smooth this out. Once again, making sure my product gets the tool rest. Notice I'm going back and forth on the grinding wheel. I'm not continually grinding at a spot. And you can see here the smooth stone gives a much smoother finish on a product. It doesn't make it so it's coarsely ground or anything like that. When you're done, make sure you turn it off. Wait for it to come to a complete stop. When it comes to a complete stop, then you can go on whatever you're doing. It really is important, though, remember when you guys are doing this, that you don't want to grind with this thing freehand up in the air. If this does get caught, what happens is this thing can snap on you. It can snap the tool, it can snap the workpiece up like this. It can get caught down in the housing on the grinding wheel, or it can just cause all sorts of bad things to happen. So always make sure that when you're grinding this thing on these things, you do have your material resting against tool rest right here, so that way it's not going to get caught in the machine in any way that you don't want to happen. Okay. When you're all done, if it is hot, it does help to cool this thing off in some water. So if we have a cooling tank available, make sure you cool off the cooling tank so you handle this thing, because as you notice what's going to happen, the heat's going to gradually move through the entire workpiece, and eventually it's going to get to the point where the workpiece is so hot where you don't want to handle it anymore. So make sure that this thing is nice and cool before you go to handle it with your bare hands. All right. Thank you for watching this, and hopefully you guys are ready for the next tool.